Good morning and welcome to Section 8 Consulting. Today we're going to be talking about a very popular topic and highly demanded, and that is how to get a higher payment standard. So if you have a voucher or you're renting a subsidy, landlords continue to raise the rent and you're stuck with making the same amount of fixed income or maybe a social security check. And in this case, I'm going to go over all the technicals of how you could potentially get a raise so you can match the course of the rent the landlord's putting on you. That being said, I want to do a small introduction as far as what I do as a business. So I am the owner of Section8Consulting.com. I work with around 1,000 clients a year, and I work in all areas when it comes to federally funded vouchers, subsidies, low-income housing, and affordable housing. So there's very little I don't know about the system, and I'm widely known amongst many out there across all 50 states. And just to be clear, I do practice in all 50 states. That being said, I've drawn up some detailed notes and a bunch of links. Now, a lot of this information will be contained in the description of the video to make things simple, and I've also enlarged the print for those of you that have a hard time seeing. Hopefully it's big enough. Let's see here. All right. So I had to make notations. This is a combination of around 21 years of experience in research and another 19 hours worth of reading and going through a lot, okay? So today I'm going to be linking you up with rent and changes under federal guides. I'm going to be giving you fair market rents, small area fair, what they call SAMFARs, which is small area fair market rents, the totality of Title 24 for tenant-based assistance. I'm also going to give you determining income and calculations for rent and the HUD administrative guide, which also is inclusive of 235 manuals and handbooks. So as you can see, you can't be Sally with a PhD in cupcakes one day and decide that you want to jump in my arena. You cannot do it, okay? Trust me on that. So as an overview, and I wanted to make one more notation that you see some highlighted areas. Those highlighted parts, I would like for you to take those to Google and kind of learn what they mean, because you need to be able to talk in the same terms when you're dealing with the housing authority. Not all terms, just the ones I've highlighted. So the maximum rent subsidy that a household in a Housing Choice Voucher program may receive is determined by the Voucher Payment Standard, as you see notated in green. Payment standards are set by the local public housing authority, which is a PHA, or Public Housing Authority. Some people like to shorten it to HA, Housing Authority, for each unit size based on fair market rents. Notation there would be FMR, for fair market rates, published by HUD each year. PHAs, which are public housing authorities, have a substantial amount of discretion to vary the voucher payment standard and may establish a different payment standards for different parts of their jurisdiction. Okay? See, it gets a little confusing in the aspect that it changes county to county and possibly even zip code to zip code. Wherever the housing authority's area of influence is, then if you're outside of that, then you would be under a different policy. All right, so look, I've lost my track here a little bit. So moving on to the approach, the Housing Choice Voucher Program helps participants afford to live in a privately owned rental housing of their choice. This is administered by HUD and managed by the local level, which is the public housing agencies or public housing authorities in your town. It is the largest HUD rental assistance program, blah, blah, blah. We all get that. As discussed in the brief HCV program, which is Housing Choice Voucher Program. All PHAs have discretion to tailor their Housing Choice Voucher Program, HCV, to meet local needs, as I've mentioned many times to a lot of clients over the years. This section discusses options for increasing voucher payment standards to allow households participating in the Housing Choice Voucher Program to access resource-rich neighborhoods with higher rents. That's a lot of words to say such a simple thing, right? All right, households who receive HCV or a Housing Choice Voucher pay about 30% of their adjusted income each month for rent and utilities, although they may choose to pay up to a maximum of 40% at the initial, and I just cut myself off with my own video in there, with the initial occupancy, in other words, the signing of the lease. The rent So up to 40% at initial occupancy to rent units that meet eligible standards. Eligible standards is just a really neat word for HQS. HQS is an acronym for Housing Quality Inspection. In other words, is it a slumlord? Is it a shanty property? Is it a bad property? Or would it actually pass a reasonable inspection? Does it have windows and doors and so on? The PHA, which is a public housing authority, is responsible for setting the payment standards for each bedroom. So let's take a look at some of this information real quick. So first thing I want to introduce you to is rents and changes. If you're going to learn what's going on, you need to apprise yourself of the policies and procedures of HUD and your housing authority. A good introduction to that would be Chapter 7, which is rents and charges. That'll be the first link I've issued in the description. Second up is going to be the federal database, which is going to be your final fair market rents and documentation system. Again, a federal database. This will give you all your FMRs, fair market rents. Look, when you're renting and they issue a voucher and they tell you this is the amount that voucher is going to be worth in your area, you check it on your FMR, your fair market rate, and if there's an extra $1,000, so you realize rents, they can adjust it between two amounts. If it isn't maxed out, then that allows us to come in later and make a request. Hey, you know what? A fair market rate said this could go up to $3,300. I'm only at $2,800. Now I'm going to make a request based on the things we're fixing to talk about in this video. All right. Next up, it's going to be SAM fairs, which is going to be small areas or small area market rents, okay? Fair market rents, and better known as SAM fairs with an S, okay? And that's a different metric, but again, a lot of systems use it. Now, as a cool explanation between fair market, FMRs, fair market rents, and small area fair market rents, the differentiating fact is one is the old system, one is the new. Your housing authority could be either one. So the fair market part, that's the older system, and is based on the whole metropolitan area. Now, the SAM fairs is more based on zip codes. In other words, if I considered the whole city of Houston and only rents for the whole city of Houston without consideration of rents being higher in different neighborhoods, then it's a bad system. With SAM fairs or small area, it means they're looking at a smaller segment of the metropolitan area, and they're more closely guiding the amount they're willing to give you. So that's a better explanation of it. Look, guys, if you're going to learn anything about my job or anything I do, you've got to read Title 24. Clearly, there are subsections and subparts A through M, and it goes on quite a while. So there's a good read there. In addition to that, you'd want to looking at Chapter 5, determine incomes and calculations for rents. That's around 80 pages, okay? A lot of people, could you just tell me real quick? I'd like to give you a crispy $5 bill, and I'd like to talk till the sun goes down, and I would like to figure out just a real quick answer how to determine my income and all this other jazz. Look, guys, that manual's 80 pages, okay? And each housing authority has a different determination. But I would encourage you to read this is a boilerplate of it, that could be adjusted by the housing authority. In addition to that, my friends, let's go over to housing handbooks and manuals. There's another lovely 238 handbooks and manuals that will quickly expedite your mind, and a combination of around 19 hours of reading, and then you would need at least an estimated decade of experience implementing, and then to ensure that you'd be able to figure it out, okay? So it's like being an attorney and specialize in this, because I don't know any attorneys that want to specialize in dealing with low income or vouchers, because their presumption is nobody has any money, so what would be the point? And that's where I come in as a consultant. Though I don't practice law, I know more about it than generally most attorneys ever would, and many law firms actually do hire me to pick up these type of cases, especially when it's part of their already bigger case. All right, moving on from that, let's get back to the metrics and factors of this. So the juicy part, we're finally here. Households who receive households who receive HCV, which is a Housing Choice Voucher, pay about 30% of their adjusted income each month for rent and utilities, though they may choose to pay upwards of a maximum 40% to meet rent units that meet eligible standards, which is the HQS or Housing Quality Standards. The PHA, which is your public housing authority, pays the balance of the rent due up to the maximum known as the Voucher Payment Standard. PHA is responsible for setting up payment standards for each bedroom size based on their fair market rates, FMR, for the surrounding area, or zip codes, which would be, when you deal with zip codes, that's small area and SAM pairs. PHAs generally have the choice of whether to establish a single set of payment standards for the entire jurisdiction, meaning fair market rates, FMR, or to use a different set of standards in different geographical areas, which was more aligned with SAM pairs, looking at different zip codes versus the whole city. PHAs in 24 large metropolitan areas, in other words, the top 24 biggest populated cities, were now required under Federal Code of Regulation in Title 24 to use small area market rents, better known as SAM pairs. The latter approach adds complexity to the program administering, but can help participants access a wider range of units by ensuring that the payment standards are tailored to rents at the neighborhood level. Units rented with HCV, better known as Housing Choice Voucher or Mainstream Voucher, are also subject to reviews to determine the reasonableness of rent based on rent levels of other similar units that are required to meet the housing quality standards set by HUD. PHAs may that apply the same payment standard across an entire metropolitan area do not account for sometimes significant differences in rent levels across neighborhoods. This approach can result in payment standards that are significantly higher than what might be required to rent an appropriate unit in a low-income neighborhood, but too low would to provide a sufficient level of assistance in high-cost areas. There are several ways that a PHA or public housing authority can adjust payment standards in certain neighborhoods, helping to increase access to the resource-rich area for housing choice vouchers. Some of these are excerpts clearly from HUD, but I wanted y'all to hear it. Now here's the great part here. I need to make a few exclusions here. Housing Choice Voucher may request an increase of their rental assistance on their rent payment. Currently, participants are required to contribute 30% of their household income towards their rent, and their voucher contributes to the remaining portion. You are now able to have up to 100% of your rent covered through your Housing Choice Voucher under specific programs, but mostly that's not true anymore. Please note that you would be responsible for paying your utilities and other costs. So I probably shouldn't have included that in the video because there really isn't that around anymore. There are two choices for asking for the change. The meat of the bones, what all you've been waiting for, right? A simple answer. There are two choices. One, if your income has decreased but your rental contribution has stayed the same, you are now paying more than 30% of your income towards your rent. You can submit a new income information asking to have your household contribution reevaluated. You can ask to have your rental contribution reevaluated based on your HA or housing authority specific procedures. That will be different with every housing authority. That's why people shouldn't be making videos about cupcakes one day and tips and tricks in another when they don't actually understand what federal law prescribes. And also, the advice would only be good for their housing authority. You need to understand and have about 17. You'd have to cover every housing authority versus every county in America to essentially understand this well, okay? That's something I do. Number two, if you experience a financial hardship or added any cost or expense, you can ask to have your voucher contribution increased. I'm going to exclude that. Voucher contribution increased. You can ask to have the amount increased up to 100% of your rent. Of course, again, that's old and non-applicable anymore. So at this point, I would say that if your contribution is at 30, they may raise it another 10% to 40. If your fair market rates or SAM pairs, they negotiated with the landlord at a lower rate, and then you could possibly ask that your voucher payment standard go higher if it has not already maxed out. Exceptions to payment standards, which is a reasonable accommodation and exception payment standard. PHAs or public housing authorities have the discretion to vary the payment standard within 90 to 110% of the fair market rent, FMR, and also SAM pairs. This gives some latitude to adjust your local market into conditions, but it is often insufficient to enable participating households to access units in higher rent resource rich areas. I don't know why they call it rich resource areas. What about a low income area where the Popeye's chicken in a pawn shop is going to give you resource rich? So the lunatic that wrote some of this needs to reevaluate their own thinking. I didn't write that part, so. Under certain circumstances, PHA can request permission from HUD to establish an exception for payment standards. Don't hold your breath from that. Only one out of maybe 80 requests to HUD will ever be granted, and that process could go on for months, if not years, if HUD ever even wants to actually raise the payment standard. For you to have the housing authority go in and burn up a bunch of administrative time to write out letters and so on to prove that they would actually need a higher FMR, fair market rate, or SAM-fair, which is small area fair market rents, would be epic, okay? And so those are rarely ever granted. So we'll go on to this part. Above the 110% of FMRs in designated parts of the jurisdiction. Except payment standards may be established for all unit sizes in a designated area or only for units with a given number of bedrooms. HUD specifies different procedures for PHAs to request an exception payment standard between 110 and I think 120. A PHA may, without HUD's approval, establish an exception payment standard of up to and including 120% of the published FMR for a reasonable accommodation. Second part here, right? So we've moved from one area to another. One meant that there's been a loss of income and so on, and now reasonable accommodation, which is a whole nother video, okay, would be a reason, and that is for a family that includes a person with a disability. Remember, it includes a single person with a disability. Examples of circumstances that may qualify for an exception payment standard. Note that word, exception payment standard. So, as I'd mentioned in green. All right, I got to take a small little break here. Trying to make an 8-minute video about anything to do with HUD is impossible, guys. Just to let you know. And if you're looking for a quick answer that's a minute or two, you're never going to get anything but rainbows and unicorns and lunatics making videos about shit they don't even understand. So I just let you know right now, if you're not prepared to sit down and focus, you're gonna struggle with this badly. All right, so as a bullet point, here are the exception payment standards. Rent of a larger unit to accommodate special equipment or live-in aid. Special features such as ADA-compliant bathrooms under the 2008 Disability Act, proximity to medical or other services. And that's not the whole list. When I get into the next video, which will be the accommodations part, it'll go into a rather long-winded explanation of that as well. So, from the HUD policy on rent reasonableness, for the family that requires an accessible unit and a unit in close proximity to medical services or a particular unit because of a disability-related reason, the accessible features or location or other particulars of a unit may justify higher rent under the rent reasonable provisions under Title 24, 982.507B, and that would be a lower number 1. For such families, the rent reasonableness determination must take the features into account. A PHA must permit a higher rent than may be necessary as a reasonable accommodation for persons with disabilities in accordance with federal civil rights laws. Okay, guys. So, in closing this video, as you can see, there, like many things to do with HUD, the housing or anything else, these are all complex matters. If you're struggling with these factors, my advice is, get in touch with a HUD specialist. They may or may not help you. You can call the housing authority. We'll see whether or not they give you more than a minute on the phone. If not, I would advise dealing with a consultant, because clearly this is what I studied. 21 years doing it. Clearly I know what I'm talking about, and I'm not making tips and tricks videos. Also, here are some of the housing handbooks. And we'll just scroll and scroll and scroll. And we're going to keep on scrolling. More manuals, keep scrolling. So you see there's a lot to that. All right, guys, I'm going to bring you back to the main page. Handbooks. All right, so to close the video, as you can see, there's many complex things that need to be considered. That's further compounded by the factors that each PHA or public housing authority may have their own policies and procedures. If you're struggling with this factor, I would say get in touch with me or any reasonable consultant or attorney. Okay, I've enjoyed making this video, and the next will be the second part of this, which will be the accommodation part, and we'll talk about some of the loopholes in there that can also help you raise your rent. All right, have a great day. Bye-bye.